Okay.
Yeah. So in the day one, as I've written in the course, we'll be just going through basic stuff like variables, constant, classes, if statements, loops, some of the object-oriented programming concepts, and we'll give you just the architecture of the Flutter framework, and we'll talk about widgets and how to get started. Now, if we are able to complete this today, we'll continue from syllabus of tomorrow. If I just go to the Dartpad, I'm sure like you'll be aware of most of the things. So this won't be very tough. So I'm here. I just visited dartpad.dev. So this is kind of an online playground where you'll be able to write code. So if you want to quickly experiment with some Dart code or even Flutter code, if you see samples here, you can even execute Flutter code here. So you can actually use widgets from the material library as you do on your phone and Flutter web and Flutter desktop. So that is a great add-on here. So just starting right away, you can see that just like many languages, we have gotten the main function where we'll be able to enter all the commands and it will get executed from this function. So starting off with methods and functions, right? Methods and functions in Dart are similar to many other languages. So this main itself is a method. I'll be able to define more methods outside of this function. So for example, I'll just go ahead and define a simple method called add. Its name, empty bracket, and then parenthesis. Now, since it will be returning of type integer, right? I'll add the type of the method here. I'll be passing parameters here. Well, again, before this, I'll just introduce you to the basic variables and data types that we use. We have integers, right? We would be using list, maps for getting the data, mostly for storing the data and taking and converting the JSON data while we are doing network calls. So again, this list and maps can be further segregated, or I can say limited to further data types. So if I say a list and then I'll open and close this greater and less than brackets, I can say integer. That will just restrict this list to an integer, right? I can initialize here as new list. Also, just to give me a call if there is something confusing that I'm saying. I mean, assuming that you've just gone through this, so I'm just giving through the this portion of the of part. Hello.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll let you know.
The same thing goes for map, but in map, instead of in list we have the values of sorry, we only store the values, right? In map we store key and value pairs. So again, we can say string and string for a map that would contain string as a key value and string as a value of that particular key. We can also say string and dynamic. What this means is the key can only be a string, but the value of that particular key could be anything, could be a list, could be a double, could be a boolean, anything, right? So a typical JSON tree would contain this kind of map object. So we'll also be able to do network calls, but that would be in some of the feature classes. So that was kind of a brush up on the data types. We can surely create new data types, classes, and objects that will be covering soon. So again, this method is just like Java. What we'll do is we can say integer A and integer B. We'll just add them and return A plus B, right? So since the return type is integer, we'll be able to add A and B. I can just say here print and 3 and 4, right? Should we add and 3 and 4? So it should just print out 7. So similarly, you'll be able to define multiple methods that even return widgets like buttons and text fields instead of integers. So that would be very much useful when we are using something like a feature builder in Flutter. So again, that will be covered in the future. Now, yeah, positioned and named arguments, right? So in Dart, these are positioned arguments, right? So if I'm writing 3 first here, so it will be taking integer a as string because it appears before 4, right? And since 4 is after 3, it will take b as 4. That is because of the order, right? Now, what we can do is instead of this, we can add braces here, right? And this will just convert this arguments that were positioned to named. What that means is instead of, here I'll just say a and then add the value of a, and then b, and then add the value of b, right? So first, all we were doing was we're just adding the values. Now we'll also have to write that what values or the what variable name for this value should be entered. Again, we have reached classes. Let me again go and do the same function as a class, right? I'll just create a class, right? I'll say addition, it should be upper camel case. So, right, so this is a class. Now let me go ahead and define those same two integers. I'll say integer a, b, right? Now we can call the addition. Okay, let me also define a method, the same method int add, and let's say I don't have to pass any arguments here. I'll just say return a and b. So what this will do is exactly what it did in the add function that we made, right? Currently, we are not passing any arguments here. What we'll do is we'll straight away pass the values in a and b, right? So all I'll do is make an object, right? Addition, I'll say add, right? I'll say add dot a will add the a's value, and similarly I'll add b's value. And say, let me say 3. And I'll just say, just print this, right? So now we have passed the values here, right? What if I want to define a constructor, right? So constructors are also defined exactly like they're defined in languages like Java. We'll say, and we'll say integer a, integer b, right? And we'll say this dot a is a, right? This, sorry, the same thing here. This dot b should be, yeah. So this way, what we can do is we can say, not here. The constructor should be initialized with objects, and then we'll be able to get the results in add, right? Now,
So I just had a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So a class, I see the class, and then you define a class, and you can have multiple objects for that class,
Right.
and you can have a method defining the class with or without the constructor. Constructor means initializing those values, right?
Exactly, yes.
And you can have a method with or without the constructor. When you have a method without the constructor, without initializing any values, you need to pass it in the body of the object. Else
Exactly.
you can define the constructor, and we just need to pass the values then in the brackets instead of passing the values in the object.
Correct. So there are multiple ways that we can pass, the values to class. Like we can initialize it like we are doing in the constructor, as you said, or we can still do those add dot a. We can just pass the values directly to the objects like this, right? But if you want to initialize, I just want to demonstrate now how the extension of the constructors in Dart, right? So this is the basic stuff that we do in Java, right? Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll just now go ahead and show you how the same thing works in Dart now. So this is a normal constructor, right? We can define it like this, or now what I'll do is comment this out and just say the constructor, that meaning class's name, right? Brackets and close it. Right here, I'll be able to take these values. what I'll say directly is this dot A, this dot B. So what it does is, looks where A is, gets the first value. This is positional, right? Not named. So whatever the first value is, it gives it to A. So we had like two different lines that we added extra because of this. It just skips this in and directly adds the value to A. So if we run this, right, so the answer will be same because both these things essentially mean the same.
So now you can pass any different like a value like a decimal or int or anything you want. Now it's not forced to be an int like it was in the
Uh,
commented section.
uh,
Oh no, your method
no,
is int, so it has to be int.
not it does not depend on the method, right? It depends on this values, right?
Oh,
So
I see.
here,
Yes.
yeah. So it will have a look at this values and directly link it to the values that we have passed here. So just imagine this as a normal constructor, but shrunken down to one line. That's it.
Okay. So you create a class, pass the values, and you can, I mean, define the values, and you can create a constructor or not create a constructor. Then you create the different methods.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I've never worked with, I have worked in programming languages, but I've not, used like extensively classes and
Hmm.
functions. I mean, I have, but then not on a daily basis. So,
Yeah. No issues. Actually, yeah. That makes sense. But in that case, I'll just run it by you one more time. Um, Again, we have made an object of add, right, addition class, and we are adding the values as positional here, and this will get caught by the constructor here, right? And it will ultimately set the values as soon as the class is defined, and then we can directly call the add method. I was also taking this faster, so I'll just decrease my speed here. Yeah, any questions?
no, no worries.
Okay.
I mean,
So
I believe we're gonna do this over and over and over again when we code in like
yeah,
Flutter.
we will for sure. We'll be defining our own classes, so we'll be doing this over and over. Yeah. So yeah, I was previously trying to do named arguments in a function that doesn't work, that I realized it right now. But I'll let me convert this to name, right? So firstly what I'll do is add braces here, right? And yeah, so this just converted into named, so I need to pass the names of the variables to which the this value will be added. So I'll say A and B, and again the result should be same, right? Now, what I need to do is I want to just make A as a compulsory. So I should be able to do required. Huh, let me, should be required. Am I making a typo? No. Okay, so it says category required. This dot name. So I think this is an issue of Dart pad, right?
Yeah.
Let me, again try this when I fire up my Android Studio. So this will be nothing but what it'll do is it'll just say, if we have not defined A, right? It'll just say that A is compulsory, please define A. And then you may or may not define 4 or B, right? Because then it will become an optional value. So this becomes important when, you have so many parameters and values to pass, but you don't want them all to be compulsory.
I understand.
Yeah,
I think I have the constructor and the classes and the methods down, but if I have any questions when I'm practicing or when we are creating them in the future, I'll just let you know.
sure,
The
sure.
more I practice, the more clear it'll get to me.
Yeah, exactly. So again, there are constructors are done. There are abstract classes in Dart, right? Um, and there is something called mixins, right, in Java, or in any other language you might have heard about interface. In Dart, it's not exactly an implementation of interface, but there are something called mixins that we'll be using in animations and animation controller. So I won't get into this right now. We'll do it when we are doing animations, right? Now, um, in an abstract class, right? Let me. So I'll give you just an overview what an abstract class is. An abstract class consider this as an abstract class. So abstract class is nothing but a class which has the definition but not the body of the code, right? For example, we defined a and b here, right? If this were abstract class, right, we just define a and b and the method add. We won't be doing anything in this method. So that is what an abstract class is. It is a shell house of the methods and the data variables that exist in that class. What we can do with an abstract class is we can use different we can implement different methods. Um, implement is the wrong word. We can extend different classes. For example, I have a class b, right? And I have defined integer a here, right, and b here. So if I extend b, the class b from a, right, I'll have this two integers a and b available over here, right? So then I'll just have to initialize them and use them. Again, it is the same for if I extend the class c or d, right? I'll have all this available methods and data types that I've declared in the class a available in this three classes. How this helps is we can have different data, right? And we can have one single data model which is same for all these classes, right? But if we have the same data that we need on all these three classes as a common data point, right? So why should we create all those duplicate data here, right? All we can do is create a kind of an abstract class in which the whole formation of the data and the function is already there. And we can override those methods in class B, C, and D, or whatever class that is extending this class A. And then we can define those, methods or data types over these classes. So this is a great example, right? Just copy it over and I'll give it here. So we can see in how an abstract class is defined is before the class keyword, we just write abstract, right? Then class and then the name of class. Again, nothing fancy here. We just add abstract, right? And walk is the method, right? Inside the abstract class person, right? Let me give a space here, right? So we have defined a method walk. We have also defined a method talk, right? We can see that there are no angular brackets like this here because again, this is an abstract class. It will give you an error if you do that. All we have to do is we have to define these two methods, right? So we have defined a class person, right? We know that the person can walk or the person can talk, right? Now I can extend multiple classes from this class person, right? For example, we know that for a fact that Jai is a person, right? So I have to make a class for Jai, right? Class Jai, right? Then use the keyword extends. That is the reason I corrected myself earlier, because class extends other classes, right? If we were using an interface, in that case we might have used implements, right, not extends. But here, since this is an abstract class, we'll use the keyword extends. So class and the class name, then extends, and which class it extends is the name of the parent class, right? So that is person. Now since once we have defined this class, right, we'll have these two methods available for us to implement, right? So before we implement walk and talk, we'll just have to write @ and override. Again, this is similar to Java. We'll say @ and override, so it'll know that that is this method that we are talking about. And then we can just say they can walk, right? Again, the same thing. We'll just print out they can talk. I'll just shift the main logic here. So again, this is like we are defining a normal class. We have an object of Jai of class Jai, right? So we are directly defining Jai, right? Since it will be extending the class person, right? We don't have to define person here because you have to understand a person is just like a model, right? Which other classes will extend, right? So this will be extended by other classes. So this does not come into picture when we are actually implementing the classes. So once we have defined the abstract class, just keep it at the side. We'll just make an object of Jai class. It will initialize it by no arguments because it does not have any constructor. We will just call this two method, that is walk and talk, right? That is go ahead and run. It should chronologically print out Jai can talk and then walk, right? Now,
So I
yeah.
understand how to do it, and I understand that abstract class, you can have methods and variables defined, and then you can keep using them in the classes that extend the main or the abstract class. But what I don't understand is what are the applications of some sort of abstract class.
Right, great question. So, for example, I have a data, right? So, just talking about network calls, right? I have a data coming in. Let's say the data is of weather, right? And I have like temperature, right? And let's say I have another. Weather is not a good example, but let's go ahead and go with it. We have a temperature, and let's say wind speed is the other method that we have. We'll again go ahead and define another method as get that extends weather, right? What we'll do is we'll again define those two methods here, and this is temperature and wind speed, right? This is a get, right? What else? Okay, no. This is a keyword get
When
value.
you say network, do you mean like API calls?
Yes,
Okay, okay.
exactly. So what? Yeah. So for example, right, we have network calls, right? So you might know that we can either get the request or get the data from the particular endpoint right here, or we can put the data here, right? For example, there is an endpoint, we can either get the data from there or we can put our own data there, right? Now, since no, we don't usually put data in weather APIs, that this might be a bad example, but the logic works is that if for example I have two methods, the one takes or gets or puts the temperature information, the other does the same for wind speed, right? So I know for a fact that in temperature, I'll need two things, right? Two separate classes. The one class will be getting the data, right? The other will be putting the data in the same subcategories. So what I'll do is I'll make an abstract class, right? Make a get class and make a put class, right? In the get class, in temperature, I'll add the logic. I'll add the logic to get the weather data, right? And in the put class, right, I'll see using the same function, I'll write the logic to put the data. So the actual model, the data model that we are using, right, is the same, right? For example, in temperature, we are returning or getting double value of temperature, right? And us, let's say a string of brief. It just gives us a briefing about what the temperature is right now, right? We need those both of this data types in temperature so that we can upload or get the data here. So again, if we do this thing normally, what we'll have to do is we'll have to make two classes, right? We'll also have to define both of these integers or the data types in both of the two classes. So you see the actual replication of the code has been done here, and the actual code that you write will be be multiplied each and every time you add a new class, right? So if you have a common set of things that you want to store or implement, right, you can make an abstract class in that way. So that is the reason we use abstract class, that it saves up the coding time or the coding space actually. Does that answer the question, or is it a bit confusing?
No, I kind of get it, but when I see it in action with actual example, I think it'll be much, much clearer. But I kind of
Okay.
get it.
So we'll be using this mainly, abstract class and extending those classes more in, let's say, Flutter's architectures. Will be defining multiple, like block is the most prevalent or popular, should I say, at this point. So we'll be using everything in block. So this again will you'll know how what the applications are there.
Okay.
So that being the abstract class, I guess the next are the if and conditional statements, the loops, right, and the object-oriented programming concepts. I'll just run you through if statements. Those are also similar, right? You want to say something?
No,
Okay.
no, sorry, I'm gonna mute myself.
No, no, that's fine. Okay,
Go ahead.
so again, the if expressions are the same as in other languages. We can do if, and then here there should be a condition, and then the body. What if this condition happens, right? So I'll again write up a simple example. I'll say int a is 5, b is 8, right? and then I'll say if a is less than b, I'll say print and a is right. Again, I can say else if um, a is greater than b, I'll say b is less or then both are right. So there is nothing super complicated here. There are this is just a bunch of conditional statement. It'll say a is less because of the comparison. Now there is also a ternary operator here. So what it does is for example, I have another variable that is c, right? And I want c to have the lesser value of a and b. So instead of writing all this, I can say if a is less than b, I'll say a is a, sorry, c is a, whatever the lesser value is, I can have that in c. If b is less, I'll say no, c is b, or otherwise, let's say c is 0, right? So we can do that through if statements, but it will be a very long code. Or what we'll do is we'll say c is, right? And here in the single line, I'll make a comparison. That is, if a is less than b, right? And then I'll put a question mark. So there will be a comparison before question mark, and after question mark, there will be a body. What happens? So if a is less than b, right? What happens? I'll just return a, right? Or, and this colon stands for or. So if now in the case that b is less than a, just return b, right? So whatever value is lesser, right, that will get returned to c. So again, the syntax goes like this. First comes a condition, right? If the condition is true, right, this the first value will get returned to c, right? And if this condition is false, the second value will get returned to c. So here we can see that the 5, right, 5 is lesser than 8. So whatever will be the value of a, right, that will get returned to c. If the value of a is greater than that of b, right, this value will get returned to c. So this stands for otherwise or else, right? Instead of else, we'll be writing this. So let's go ahead and run. Again, it will give the same output. I have to print the value of c. Sorry about that. Yeah, 5. That is the value of smaller integer. Now we can always, use multiple, like in if case, we can use else ifs, right? So in ternary, there might not be a syntactical way of doing that, but we can always extend the same logic, right? So we can say that if, right? So in this condition, for example, we have not implemented what if a and b are equals, right? So in this case, what will happen is it will again return the value of b. But what we want is we want the value of c to be 0, right? So why will it return b is again, since a won't be less than b, right? In the case of, let's say, both are 8, right? So this condition will be returning false. What happens when this condition returns false is it will hop onto here, right? We'll just return the value of b, that is 8, but we want 0, right? So what we'll do is here, right, the else condition will say that if b is less than a, right, question mark, and here the first body comes, then return b, right? B is less than a, just return b, or, right, or just return 0 if both are equal. So again, format it and let's run it. We should return 0, right? So
So
again,
this is called ternary operator.
yeah, correct.
Okay.
So this is clear, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this can be useful, especially in Flutter, where we have, we want to take decisions in the code. I'll give you a good example here. Is if, for example, we have an app, right? We want to show the loading screen when it is loading, right? And we want to show the button when it is not loading. So what I'll do is I'll just say bool, and then loading is equals to true. For example, when we enter the screen, it should start loading, right? And after I say loading is true, right, I'll just enter the code here, whatever we need to, load. It will just load here, and after loading, we'll say loading is false. Now between this, right, since the calls will be asynchronous, we'll have to display something here, we'll have to render the UI, right? So in the UI, if you have seen the build method, we can have multiple widgets stocked on top of each other, right? So there we can have, right, we have a container, let's say, uh, of data, right? We have some data here that we are showing, right? But we don't want to show the data when it is loading, right? It doesn't make sense. So what I can do is I can use this ternary operator. I'll say if loading is true, then in that case, do not show this container of data, right? In that case, just show a circular progress indicator, right? So this will just throw the the loading icon on the loading animation while the loading is true. Now whenever it reaches this false method, right, it will just return the container. So that is also part of reactive programming, right? That everything has a state and an event. Again, you'll get that when we go through the architecture. But this is kind of a most used thing in Dart wherever we are using the ternary operator, because in code itself, wherever we are adding the widgets, we might not be able to use if cases. We can actually in some versions of Dart, or after adding some kind of developer packages, but I'm not sure if we can use the if statements right away in the design logic. So in that case, the ternary operator is kind of a useful thing in Dart. Okay, going through the loops, right? Again, the loops here are quite as similar as other languages, that there is a for loop, right? We can say for integer I is 0, right, to I is less than is equals to 10, let me get less than, right, I plus plus, and we can print the f of 4 should be small. We can print the value of I. Yeah. Very simple. Just print the value of I from 0 to 9. Yeah, we can do the same thing with while loop. So I'll say in while loop, what we have is we have while, and here we have condition, then we have the body, right? So till this condition is matching, right, till this condition is happening, this body will get executed. So let's make it integer I to 0, right? So I'll say till I is less than 10, just go into this code. What we'll do is we'll print I, right, I, and then we'll say increment the I by 1 every time we go into the body. So it should again print from 0 to right? And in do while, right, we have do, and then we have the body. Then after the body is done, I'll have while and then the condition. So here, let me say again, as I've already declared I, let me just make it 0. And then here the body will be there. So again, the same thing, right? And here the condition, this, right? But in do while loop, if we as the same condition as while, it will return the uh, different results. Yeah. Yeah. So now this has returned the same. But what I was trying to say is, since the logic is here, sorry, the condition is here, right? So the first call, even if it is false, even if the condition, if this were 11, the first call would be executed anyways, because since we are adding the condition here, right, whatever the first call is, that will, the first loop or the first iteration will get printed anyways. So since 11, even if it is greater than 10, it will get printed, since the condition lies at the bottom of the pass, right? So these were kind of the three basic loops covered. We can also use the loops in lists and maps. For example, I'm declaring a list, let's say list numbers, right? And I'm adding the numbers from 1 to 100 here. I'll initialize here new list. Let me do a while loop. I'll say we make a for loop, not while, from 1 to from 1 to 100. We'll just add now define integer I from 1 till it is 100. What I'll do is I'll add those integers in the list, right? So this code will just add those integer into the list. Now in lists and maps itself, what I can do is I can write the object name, right? I can say dot sorry, for to set map for each, yeah. So there is a method named for each, right, in which executes a loop inside this object of list, and the same can be done for map, right? So we can see that in this list we are storing integers, right? So I'll say integer a, right? Define here. There should be a function here. So say integer a, and I'll write the body here. What is the issue? Null can't be assigned to parent. For each, okay, I shouldn't have typed the data type, but I can print that here. So what this will do is it will run through each and every data that is stored inside this list, and it will just go ahead and print it, right? So it is just like a loop, but that is provided in the method body of the list. Same can be done with maps or any other data type that has the list of certain things. So I guess the whole portion of kind of the basics of Dart has been covered. I want to run you through the